I'd like to come back to what you said there about, perceiving universal truth or cosmic consciousness through psychedelics. But I know that you also have a unique interpretation of why some people in psychedelic states feel like they're communicating with other intelligences. Especially DMT, people talk a lot about super intelligent entities, interdimensional beings. So, Andreas, what do you think is going on there?
Right. DMT in particular is the one that seems to produce the most genuine feeling of other intelligences saying very concrete things. This is definitely a rabbit hole, but I do have some thoughts on like why DMT in particular produces those feelings and what those actually correspond to. I will say for sure that in some sense on DMT, you do experience higher dimensional beings. I do think that's true. I just don't think they are external and independently existing, but they are higher dimensional and higher dimensional in a way that only DMT, as far as I know, can really produce. I mean, maybe just an example of what I mean by higher dimensional is that when you take a small dose of DMT and you look at a wall, you will see that it will start to tessellate. You will have what's called the wallpaper symmetry groups, basically ways in which the arrangements can repeat symmetrically, and there's a limited number of them, 17. If you take a slightly higher dose, you will enter a three-dimensional space where almost certainly the surfaces of that three-dimensional space will be filled with symmetrical patterns. Now, if you take an even higher dose, the symmetrical patterns in the walls of those rooms will also be correlated, such that in walls that are in opposite sides of each other, the symmetries are twisting or moving synchronized in complementary ways. This is something that a lot of trippers and anonymous psychonauts have reported when I have interviewed them. And to me, this strongly suggests this notion of virtual higher dimensions. Because when you have interlocking patterns in 3 dimensions that are, in a sense, moving in complementary and symmetrical ways, you are creating a virtual 4th dimension. And it doesn't seem to stop there. A high enough dose of DMT can produce hallucinations that have, quote unquote, virtual higher dimensions of maybe up to 7 dimensions. Again, sounds completely crazy, but there's a precise mathematical way to describe actually what's happening here. You're in this high dimensional space, and then you're hallucinating these other entities. The crazy thing is that the way in which you think in this space will be very different than how you think in normal space, partly because of the higher dimensions. And in that sense, you are temporarily a super intelligence of a sort. You are a higher intelligence than us in the sense that you're able to experience objects that are actually impossible to render in our normal everyday form of consciousness. Of course, you are less intelligent in some sense. I mean, I'm sure you would be really bad at an IQ test or something like that on a high dose of DMT, but you'll be potentially really good at some kind of a visual spatial test of being able to render higher dimensional objects, which no test like that currently exists, but I'm sure we can design one, and people on DMT would probably be really good at it. So, okay, you have this enhanced intelligence temporarily, and you're also hallucinating entities. Well, those entities will feel super highly intelligent actually because you're sharing the same, in a sense, higher dimensional space with them. So I don't think they're super intelligences outside of you. I think they are projections of your own temporary super intelligence. You are a super intelligence and you're creating these avatars that are showcasing what you can do with this higher intelligence that you just acquired and you're about to lose. Oftentimes it's very difficult to tell apart, is this intelligence mine or the intelligence of the other entity? And I think it's quite indistinguishable in the state, but upon reflection, you can infer that it was you. You were the super intelligence you were talking to.
That's fascinating. One thing that I think does make me slightly more open to the possibility, not so much of extra-dimensional entities, but that, psychedelics or altered states may in some sense bring us into a deeper contact with reality is, as you and I were talking about earlier, there are compelling reasons to think that consciousness is a deep fundamental in the universe, that our minds might be an expression of this larger principle of consciousness. So that does make me more open-minded than perhaps I otherwise would be to the idea that these states might allow for some deeper contact with reality. So, for example, in the analogy that you used earlier with the balloon twisting to create our sense of separate identity, perhaps psychedelics or very altered states have the effect of slightly untwisting that knot and allowing some of that larger reality to spill in. That does seem to be at least a possibility to me.
Yeah. All of these views can definitely be stillment. The view of the untwisting of the balloon. A lot of people would say that 5-MeO-DMT resonates a lot with that metaphor. I can definitely see ways of stillmanning this idea that on 5-MeO-DMT, you're, in some sense, untwisting the balloon and releasing the pinch point into the broader field of consciousness. And that only happens on breakthrough dosages. And if you don't get breakthrough dosage, you might have like some other weird effects, but you won't have these merging with the Godhead, so to speak, which might be, the entire field or something like that. And I think we can stillman this view by basically saying something along the lines of what is separating us from the rest of reality is a topological twist on the electromagnetic field, that our brains are kind of like pinching the electromagnetic field. And perhaps if the brain stops functioning in a particular way, that pinching breaks down. And in that sense, the contents of the electromagnetic field that were inside spill over into the outside and vice versa. It's a possibility, and I would love to test it and explore it. And I think it's possible, in a sense, to test it. There might be very clean, measurable signatures of the topology of the electromagnetic field, and maybe it changes when you take 5-MeO-DMT.